I've had my ups and downs, but it makes no sense to me to watch lots of times the wicked prosper and the good people suffer.
Why do you help certain people but neglect to help others? A while ago, my mom was actually hit by a car while running, and that kind of started getting me questioning, why can a pro football player get a touchdown and thank God for it, but God can't stop a man from running my mom down on the side of the road?
So when I first moved to Hawaii, I had $40 to my name, no job, no place to live. Lived on the beach for a little while, and this couple, Leilani and Joseph, took me into their home, let me live with them. They gave me a job, and just some of the most beautiful people in the world. So kind, so giving, and they've been trying for about a year and a half to have a child, and she just had a miscarriage. And it just makes no sense to me that people that clearly would be such they give so much love and deserve so much to have a child, like how can you take that away from them?
It makes me angry. To be completely honest, it makes me very, very angry that only some people get the assistance that they actually need, which makes me question the reality of God. Is God really only helping a select few people and neglecting the rest of us?
Oh, goodness. Why would you put us here in the first place? Why are you going to put a bunch of humans on a planet and, leave us to our own destruction? This life is stressful and it's painful, and I'm very weary. I don't know, why life has taken such a toll on me.
My question is, why did my stepdad have to die? My adopted father, why? I was a star athlete. He was part of my team. He was always a coach. My dad died. My first game after he died, I got on base, took my lead off, look over at third. My dad wasn't there. I just sat down, started crying, had my hands, didn't go back. Haven't played since. I even ended up dropping out of school, because I wasn't an athlete anymore. I don't see any way that made my life any better than the direction it was headed. I don't understand. Why? Explain that to me, please.
Yeah, I definitely relate to that. My dad died about 10 years ago, and he was really young, and I have a lot of those same feelings and that same question, like, why my dad? Why then? There's
obviously a purpose behind everything, and you just got to deal with it when it comes.
I've always imagined that he'd probably say something like, "It's in my plan," which has never been, a good enough answer for me. I would hope that he would tell me exactly why my mom getting hit by a car was a good experience for me to live through. Why my parents getting divorced and my father leaving for good was a good experience for me to live through. I want to know, why are you going to allow terrible things to happen to me if I'm going to devote my life to you? Those questions do make me doubt the existence of God. If this is what it means to be a Christian, I don't want that.
A lot of pain in the world, a lot of stories of pain. Some are far away, places you've never been, faces you've never seen. It might be natural disasters you see on the news, or war, or news of terror, individual stories. Some are closer to home. Some are people you know, some are yourself. Sickness or disease, a failed relationship, a pregnancy that doesn't go full term, a death of a loved one. There's pain. There's just pain, right, in people's lives. You've experienced it. You know people who have experienced, and sometimes that pain can go so deep it causes you to start asking some of these questions. These guys are in pain. What you just saw on the video, they have experienced pain, and it kind of helps you understand maybe why they are where they are at. They've never really been able to figure out the answer to some of these questions. Why would God do this? Why would God allow these type of things? Matter of fact, the number one question in a survey a few years ago that was given to people, the number one question, if you could ask God any question at all, the number one question came out was, why is there so much suffering in the world? It's an honest question. It's a fair question. Job asked the question, when his world was crumbling around him in the Old Testament. We read the story of Job. Some of the writers in Psalms, that David wrote most of them, but there are other writers in there that it's questioned there too. They're being pressed and having some hard times in their life, and they'll ask the question. I get a feeling people must have been asking it the same question in the days of Jesus too, or at least Jesus knew they would be, because in John chapter 16, he's talking to his disciples, and he says, in the world you will have tribulation. In the world you will have tribulation. At least one other version uses the word trouble there. You'll have trouble. Things are going to stink sometimes. There will be pain in your life. It doesn't say maybe there's a possibility you might have a day or two. He says it's going to happen. You're going to have pain. There's going to be tribulation. There's going to be trials in your life. That doesn't answer why, though, which is really where they were coming from. And the question that you might have asked, or you're asking, or have had friends who've asked before. And the honest answer to that, which follow me through here, it's not really a cop-out, but it's that we honestly don't know always what's going on. I mean, sometimes there's just not an answer to some of the questions out there. The Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13:12, for now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Okay, now it's dim, then in heaven, when we see him, we'll be face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. We don't see with God's eyes. We don't see clearly even God right now. There's so many things we just don't know. And at best, we have this mirror, this foggy mirror vision of some of the things of life, including why does pain happen? Well, what's going on? Why would God allow these things? So when we ask specific questions and we want to know why a particular thing happened, we might not always get the full answer that we want to have. Someday we'll see with clarity, and we'll look back. Okay, now I get it. But now things are foggy. So now what our challenge is, and our challenge to encourage people who have these questions is to remember some of these principles we're going to talk about today. We have 5 key biblical principles we're going to talk about that can help us be grounded in times of pain and maybe give some perspective to people who are doubting, because that's really what this series is all about. Like, can there really be a God? This is happening. This might hopefully give some light, maybe wipe off a little bit of the fog, see a little bit more clearly. It's keeping these perspectives. And the first one is that God is not the creator of evil and suffering. It's good to understand, where does evil come from? Did God do this? Why did God do this? Well, did he do it? People will wonder. And it seems like, I don't remember now if I'm thinking of something else or if they just said it. Some dude asked, why would God create this, right? But sometimes you'll hear people ask it. I've heard people ask that before. Why would God create a world where there's suffering and pain? And the short answer is, well, he didn't. He didn't create a world with pain and suffering. He did create one that was good. Roger read it earlier. In Genesis 1:31, God saw everything he had made, and behold, it was very good. He looked and said, this is good. He made this perfect earth that was full of peace, and that was full of goodness, and it was right. It was a good time. There was an absence of evil. There was an absence of pain and an absence of suffering. And then God created with us, in us, this ability to love. But he also gave us the freedom to decide to not love. Because genuine love has to be able to decide if they love you or not. Because that may seem kind of odd, but you have to have the choice. If God programmed us just to say, I love you, that's not real love, is it? It'd be kind of like one of those creepy dolls that are like programmed to say, things over and over again, and you just push the button and it says, I love you. That's not what he was looking for in us. You're going to go to bed and have nightmares on this little doll. That's not that creepy, but he's not looking for a programmed response from people, but he's looking for someone who will decide and say, yes, I do love you. Yes, I will follow you. I want to go your direction. And to experience genuine love, even this doll, would have to have the ability to decide to do so. We call that free will. It's free will. Unfortunately, every single person on the planet, myself included, and you as well, at some point decided in our free will to not love God, to disobey, to do our own thing, to go our own direction, right? And it resulted in two kinds of evil in the world. There is moral evil and natural evil. Moral evil is the pain and suffering that comes because we choose to sin. I am selfish, I am arrogant, I'm full of pride, I have uncaring behavior, I am sometimes hateful and abusive, and the whole world is filled with these people, yourself included, myself included. And it leads to all kinds of suffering on the earth. Romans 3:23 says that all have sinned. We've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And so we have this whole world full of people, this whole world choosing to live outside of God's love, which in turn causes us to hurt each other, whether directly or indirectly, but it causes harm in the world. And so people might say, well, why would God allow a famine over here in this other area to happen, and these poor innocent children are starving to death? Why would God do that? Well, the reality is we live in a world that produces plenty of food. But whether it's selfishness or greed or corruption at some level somewhere, something is keeping that food. It's not God keeping the food from them. It's some person, people somewhere are keeping food from those in famine. It goes back to us again. Pretty much anything you mention, why would this be allowed to happen? Well, because people are allowing it to happen for some reason, whatever the reason is, but it boils down to sin and personal choice. I love me more than I love God. I don't choose to love God, so I'm going to treat people poorly. That's the moral evil. The secondly is natural evil. And that can include anything from wildfires, like started from lightning or something, or earthquakes, tornadoes, hurricanes, whatever. They're not directly related to people and sin, right? But they go directly back to Adam and Eve and their choice to disobey and the consequences of this world that we live in. Enduring, it's happening because of that choice. That's part of the curse of Adam and Eve. Romans 8:22, Paul says, "For you know that the whole creation has been groaning together as in the pains of childbirth until now." All creation is longing for things to be made right again. It's like we're all in pain, even the earth. It's just like we're just waiting for things to be made right again. One author explained it this way: we humans told God to shove off. He partially honored our request. Nature began to revolt. The earth was cursed. Genetic breakdown and disease began. Pain and death became a part of the human experience. That's the natural evil we're talking about. God did not create evil and human suffering. We did. It boils down to human. He created the potential for evil to be there, created us with free will and with the ability to choose, because that was the only way to create genuine love that he was looking for. It was us that created evil and has kept it going. And the obvious question might be, well, couldn't he see this coming? Well, really? Why would he do this then? Couldn't he see it coming? Well, I'm sure he did. I'm sure he did. But it's kind of like some 30 years ago, my wife Cheryl and I having a conversation, are we going to have children? And we're like, well, and we start talking about it. It's a risky thing. They're being born into a scary world. They're going to face disappointment. There could be bad things that happen. They may choose to not love us. And we had all that conversation and all the risk, and we weighed the pros and cons. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and have kids anyway and see what happens. Because we also knew there could be an amazing relationship that could come. There could be just tremendous joy that comes in parenting. There's so many positives that can come from being a parent. And so we said, yes, we'll go ahead and have children. Now, God knew the same thing. He knew that in his creation and mankind that there would be good and there would be bad, that someone would rebel against him. He knew many would choose to follow him and have a relationship relationship with him and spend eternity in heaven with him. And it was worth it. It was worth it, just like it was worth it for you. However things are going right now in relationships with your children, it's worth it. It was worth it. It was worth the risk. Even though in his case, it would ultimately cost him the life of his own son, Jesus. He still did it. Here's another principle. Though suffering is not good, God can use it to accomplish good. And this was some of the people on the video were kind of struggling with. They haven't gotten yet to where they've seen any good from it. But look at what Paul says in Romans 8. This will be familiar to you if you're a believer. We know that for those who love God, all things work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. So God promises there will be bad times in our lives, but he will take the bad times and he will make something good come out of it. Now, it may not be immediately. It may not be the next week. It may not be when you want it to happen. It may not be, I mean, you know, remember, we're still in that foggy mirror thing. It might be in the afterlife where you look at it and you realize, I don't know. I don't have the answer to that. We see dimly now. But he doesn't make this promise to everybody. If you look at the verse carefully, it's for those who follow him. It's for those who have made him Lord, who obey him, as its promise is for. And so in part, you think, well, you got a group of non-believers saying, I don't get it. You know, what? Well, there's a lot that comes with this package, and part of it's following Jesus, which puts you on a journey to gain some good out of the pain. The Old Testament gives us a pretty good example in Joseph. You remember the story of Joseph. He was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, him into terrible suffering, unfairly accused of a crime, spent time in prison unfairly. I mean, there was just a bad life for a number of years, and ultimately, finally, after waiting, some dozen years or so, he becomes the second highest ranking man in all of Egypt, where he ultimately saves the lives of the brothers who betrayed him, as well as countless others. Who knows how many people he really saved. And after all of that, here's what he said to his brothers in Genesis 50. As for you, brothers, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. Now, he didn't know that when he was sitting in prison. He didn't know that when he was sitting in the bottom of the pit or being dragged out of the pit, being sold into slavery. I mean, he didn't know it in the bad times. He just kept faithful. He just kept his eyes on God. He kept his faith. And ultimately, God brought him out of it and then used him, and used those experiences to train him to be the man he would be and the leader he would be. And he did some things that actually saved a lot of people. Now, if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, this is tremendously encouraging, isn't it not? To know that there's not a wasted pain, to know there's not a suffering that's just going to fall on the ground and do nothing. It's just tremendously encouraging that God can and will take whatever pain you're experiencing and draw something good out of it. Maybe it'll draw you closer to him. Maybe it'll be building and molding your character to prepare you for something else he has coming, like he did with Joseph. Maybe it'll be something else. Our job is not to worry so much about that, but just to keep our eyes on him and just keep faithful and keep trusting him and following him, even through the difficulty. That's our challenge. That's our quest. Next principle here is the day is coming when suffering will cease and God will judge evil. Maybe you've heard people say, if God has the power to eliminate evil and suffering, why doesn't he just do it? That's a good question. Just stop it, right? Just wave your hand and make it all go away, right? But it's kind of like reading a novel. Can you imagine reading a novel, you get about halfway through the book and you kind of slam the book and slam it on the table? So that's stupid. He's not finishing up, there's all these unanswered questions, he's not developing the characters. It doesn't end well. And you're like, well, dude, you haven't finished the book. He's working on it, all right? That's like going to the first Harry Potter and not like the 29 others to figure out how it all ends. I mean, it's like, you don't know. You just don't know. I mean, you kind of started the story and you're in the middle of developing characters, but you don't know how it ends. Well, it's kind of the same story as life, right? The story of the world isn't over yet. And the Bible promises that there will be a day when all sickness is gone and pain is gone and evil will be eliminated and people will be held accountable for the evil they committed and justice will be served in a perfect way. And that day will come. It just hasn't yet. We're halfway through the book. or somewhere in there. We're in the middle of this book. And so what's God waiting for? Why is he holding up? Why don't we just get this thing done, right? Let's fix this. And here's what's interesting. It's the very people who are doubting and struggling and that we've been talking about in this whole series that he's waiting on. 2 Peter 3:9 says the Lord is not slow to fulfill his promise, as some count slowness, but is patient toward you, not wishing that any should perish, but that all should reach repentance. Isn't that crazy? He's actually waiting for the person who's angry with him, for the person who's doubting him, for the person who's like saying, this is ridiculous. He's waiting patiently, saying, I'm going to give him another chance. I'm going to give him another day. We're going to go another chapter in the book. He's waiting patiently for them to put their faith and trust in Christ. But of course, that patience won't last forever. The Scripture promises that the day will come, and that kind of leads to our next thing to remember in times of pain, our next principle here, that our suffering will pale in comparison to what God has in store for us as followers. Now, this doesn't minimize. I'm not minimizing the pain. If you're in the middle of pain, the pain is real, and it hurts, and it's deep, right? So I'm not minimizing that, but what this is saying is it's talking about long-term perspective. The Apostle Paul suffered through all kinds of crazy stuff, physical torture. He was beat many times. He was stoned. Had people threw rocks at him, attempting to kill him several times. He was shipwrecked. He was imprisoned. He was rejected by people. He had hunger. He had thirst. Far more pain, honestly, than most of us will ever face in our lives. But look what he says in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. He says, for this light momentary affliction is preparing us for an eternal weight of glory beyond comparison. Excuse me? This light momentary affliction? A guy who's been flogged 5 times, literally making hamburger meat out of his back, beaten to a bloody pulp at least 3 times by rods, all the things we've mentioned. Yet he says in Romans 8, for I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. That's perspective. There's a man looking at the internal and external, physical and emotional, and just all the pain that we read about in his life and saying, yeah, it's not even worth comparing to what's coming. It's gonna be all right. He's looking ahead, have an eternal perspective on the matter, and he's saying it's gonna be all right. Let's look at it this way, if this helps. It's the first day of the year, and you have just a terrible day, right? I mean, it's the first day one of the year, and you suddenly you have to go in for a root canal, and like they're out of pain medicine, and they just tell you to grin and bear it, right? And you go through this, and on the way home you crash your car, and you realize you forgot to make your insurance payment, so the company's like, sorry for you, buddy. And then you come home and discover while you were doing all that, someone broke into your house and stole all of your valuables, and in the middle of time you realize that a close friend betrayed you because they called the crooks and said, hey, he's getting the root canal. It's just a terrible day, right? In the words of a classic book, you're having a terrible, horrible, not good, very bad day, right? It's awful. It's an awful day, right? But then pretend every other day the rest of the year, that was day one, right? And every other day the rest of the year turns out to be just this over-the-top, crazy, amazing day. A friend wins the lottery and gives you $100 million just because they felt sorry for your experience the day before. You get promoted at work to like the dream job you've always wanted and always thought would be cool, and now that's yours. Time magazine shows up and takes your picture because you're going to be man or woman of the year because you're just that wonderful and everybody wants to know about you. And you take a 6-month vacation to Tahiti and the construction, because you got to be somewhere while the construction crew is building your brand new house that you have designed personally and don't want to mess with all the details. And that's like every single day the rest of the year. That's what's going on. And at the end of the year, someone says, hey, how was your year? You're like, it was the greatest year ever. I love life. This is wonderful. And they're like, wait a minute, didn't you have like a root canal on January 1st? You're like, oh yeah, I guess I did. Weren't you broken into? It's like, suddenly that stuff faded away. Somewhere through the year, You just weren't, it was awful. It was painful and terrible, right? But somewhere along the line, you're like, so what? That was just my old yucky car. I've got 19 cars now because I got $100 million from my friend. You're just not worried about what happened on day one. See, if you're a follower of Jesus, that's your future. I don't know, it sounds pretty good to me. I mean, not, down to the detail, but you get the point, right? Yes, there is real, terrible, awful pain in this life, and you have felt it, and I have felt it, and if you haven't, you will. Don't worry, it's coming, right? It'll happen. But it's like the old hymn says, when we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing his praise than when we first begun. I think you spend a little bit of time in heaven and let someone ask you, hey, how is life? Whatever it is you're going through now or have gone through now that has been pain, the pure bliss of heaven, you're going to be like, it's awesome. How's life? I'm hanging with Jesus. How's life? There's no more tears. There's no more pain. Yeah, I chipped up a piece of gold from the concrete today and put it, whatever. I know. It's just the bliss of heaven. Suddenly, the pain of this life fades away into oblivion. Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9, no eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor the heart of man imagined what God has prepared for those who love him. You're only in day one. This whole life existence that we know on this earth is day one. You've got eternity coming, and the best is yet to come. That perspective, no matter what you're going through, brings an amazing amount of peace and help. It still hurts, but it brings peace. One more here. Excuse me. We decide whether to turn bitter or to turn to God for peace and courage. That's an important foundational thing. This is our choice. This is our choice. We decide. The same suffering that causes one person to become bitter and reject God can cause another one to run toward God, to become softer and more compassionate and more loving and more gentle. One person will lose a child to a drunk driver and be filled with rage to the day they die. Another will turn that into care and create an organization like Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. You'll take bitterness and you can choose to be bitter or to get better. And it's a choice we make. We started this morning talking about John chapter 16, verse 33, where Jesus says, in the world you will have tribulation. Let's look at the full verse. He says, I've said these things to you that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. It's two important things that Jesus brings to us when we're hurting, that he offers to us: peace to deal with our present and courage to face our future. Here's the deal. Jesus has already conquered the world. It's a done deal. He's already done that. And he has deprived the world of its ultimate power over you. All right? I mean, hear this, all right? Get this, right? Suffering doesn't have the last word in your life. Death does not have the last word in your life. Jesus has the last word in your life. That's important. That is important. A Christian philosopher, Peter Crayford, explains that God's ultimate answer to suffering isn't an explanation, it's an incarnation. Here's what he said: suffering is a personal problem. It demands a personal response. And God isn't some distant, detached, and disinterested deity. He entered into our world and personally experienced our pain. Jesus is there in the lowest places of our lives. He says, are you broken? He was broken like bread for us. Are you despised? He was despised and rejected of men. Do you cry out that you can't take any more? He was a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. Did someone betray you? He was sold out. Are your most tender relationships broken? He loved and was rejected. Did people turn from you? They hid their faces from him as if he were a leper. Does he descend into all of our hells? Yes, he does. From the depths of a Nazi death camp, Corrie ten Boom wrote these words, "No matter how deep our darkness, he is deeper still. Every tear we shed becomes his tear." He goes on to say that it's not just that God knows and sympathizes with your troubles. Any close friend can do that. I mean, he's more than a close friend. That Jesus is much closer than your closest friend, because if you put your trust in him, then he is in you. He is in you, and therefore your sufferings are his sufferings. Your sorrow is now his sorrow. So when tragedy strikes, and it will, when suffering comes, as it will, when you wrestle with pain, and you know you will, if you have not now, when you make the choice to turn into his arms and run into his arms, here's what you're going to discover. Peace to deal with your present, courage to deal with your future, and you'll find this incredible promise that someday you'll have eternal life in heaven, and it all fades away. Just stand with me. Let's pray.